Trent Horn versus Jacob Henson on if the Book of Mormon is divinely inspired. This debate was intense. Bombs were thrown. If you had asked me whether a debate over the truth of the Book of Mormon between a Catholic apologist and an LDS defender would be interesting, I would have said no. While reading through the Book of Mormon, I haven't found anything egregiously offensive, but it is, frankly, quite boring. However, this debate was anything but. Trent Horn, the golden boy of Catholic apologetics in American English, and Jacob Henson of Thoughtful Faith, a milquetoast LDS YouTube channel that could bore even drying paint, created something special. Real dialogue and real disagreement in a structured YouTube debate. The debate was hosted on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas channel as a live stream, with Matt as the moderator. While I'm not a fan of his personality, he is a significant creative force in American Catholic apologetics, and he has proven himself to be fair in most of his interactions with guests on his channel. The debate opened with Fradd providing a brief description of the Book of Mormon. Jacob began by taking the affirmative, arguing in support of the claim that the Book of Mormon is divinely inspired. Spoiler alert, he never actually gets to that claim. Like many debates lately, the topic seems to be more of a suggestion and an excuse for two well-known apologists in their respective realms to engage and disagree in front of an audience they wouldn't typically reach. Jacob does a terrible job of defending the Book of Mormon, primarily because his arguments never actually do so. His strategy seemed to be to lower the credibility of the Bible, to force the Book of Mormon onto equal footing with it, rather than elevating the credibility of the Book of Mormon to match the Bible in quality and value. This was a mistake, and I feared Trent Horn would fall into this tar pit along with Jacob. A snare atheist and anti-theist are eagerly waiting for an apologist of Trent Horn's caliber, both in popularity and credibility, to be caught in. Another major flaw in Jacob's argument is his claim to have archaeological, literary, and historical evidence, which he never actually provides or demonstrates the quality or factualness of. Instead, it is Trent Horn who presents this so-called evidence and gives Jacob the opportunity to defend it, which Jacob seems incapable of doing directly. Jacob's biggest claim is that Joseph Smith did not write the Book of Mormon, and his strongest argument for its truth or divine inspiration is the positive effects it has on its readers. The most dangerous aspect of Jacob's argument is his effective discrediting and invalidation of the Exodus, striking at the foundation of the Bible as understood by most Protestant Christians, evangelicals, and American fundamentalists, as literal and containing only a plain and simple meaning. If the Protestant understanding of the Bible's meaning is correct, and if Jacob's argument is sound, valid, and true, then the Bible and all of Christianity are false. Unfortunately for Jacob, he does not seem to grasp the implications of his strategy. Thankfully for those of us who identify as Christians and Catholics, Trent does not fall into this trap. Instead, he refutes it in his first warm-up swing as he steps up to bat for his introduction. He begins by distancing the Book of Mormon from the Bible, starting with geography. Unfortunately, Jacob's opening is effective enough that it lingers in the mind. Even as Trent acknowledges any shortcomings or disagreements in the field of biblical studies, I fear Jacob may have inadvertently sown the seeds of doubt, potentially leading someone toward atheism or causing someone to fall away from the faith. For example, when Trent highlights the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, it brings to mind the anachronisms in the Bible. Incorrect naming schemes, failed prophecies, and the copying of phraseology from the Bible to the Book of Mormon only serves to highlight similar issues within the Bible. However, the Bible's problems with narrative theft go beyond borrowing from itself in earlier books of its canon. It also involves stealing tropes and archetypes from so-called pagan narratives that preceded it. While none of this should be an issue for a well-rounded Catholic, whose faith does not rely on the Bible's originality or infallibility, I can see how such realizations about the parallels between the Bible and the Book of Mormon might destroy the faith of someone whose religious identity is tied to the Bible's presupposed univocality, originality, and inerrancy. A minor weakness in Trent's defense of the Bible in this debate is that it relies on classical theology and Catholic dogma, as can be read in the councils and creeds, rather than what is actually stated word for word in the Bible. As a Catholic, I have no problem appealing to qualified authorities like the magisterium or the church fathers. But I doubt this defense would work for Protestants who question the validity and authority of such sources. When Trent was questioning the golden plates, one cannot help but think of the tablets of the Ten Commandments being destroyed. In questioning Joseph Smith's failed prophecies, one cannot help but recall Jesus saying that this generation will not pass until the new kingdom comes, or other Old Testament prophecies that were not fulfilled until the coming of Jesus, outside of the context, referential reach, and lifetime of the original author of the specific Old Testament book. Finally, Trent Horn's shot across the bow toward Islam and the Quran was unnecessary and only served to highlight the seeming foolishness or absurdity of most religious claims and their related sacred text. For instance, as someone who enjoys Taoism and has read the Tao Te Ching, the fact that the author may never have existed as a real person would be a significant problem if truth claims were based solely on the authenticity of the name attached to the work's authorship. This would destroy any credibility of the Gospels if pseudonymity and anonymity were disqualifiers. Another mistake made by both Trent and Jacob is the appeal to the unique greatness of a work's literature. While there are amazing books within the Bible that rival any great literary work in human history, there are also books in the Bible that are so boring as to be almost unreadable. The Quran is not the greatest poem ever written, nor the greatest poem ever recited. The Book of Mormon is the most boring thing I've read in years, and I've read through the church fathers and church documents. Art is subjective, taste is relative, and the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and all religious texts should not be judged based on their entertainment value as a qualifier for their truth claims. Any human can write anything. There is no such thing as, "That's so amazing no one could make it up." That is a false statement. Poets lie, and anybody can make up anything and write anything. That's why imagination, literature, and fiction exist. This is a terrible criterion for credibility, unless we're going to start calling the Witcher series history and the Lord of the Rings theology. Jacob's rebuttal does more to damage the credibility of the historical accuracy of the Old Testament than anything Dr. Kip Davis or Bart Ehrman have publicly said to date. However, the positive side of the rebuttal is that Jacob did not hold back, which provided fuel and energy for Trent Horn to respond to in kind. In his rebuttal, Trent Horn was snappy, aggressive, and surprisingly funny. This is the Trent Horn I want to see in every debate, not the one who falls asleep while debating James White, and not the cordial, snooty, arrogant Trent who debates Jimmy Akin. This fiery and funny Trent Horn is who I hope to see in debates going forward. Whether I get that or not is not up to me, but it's that for which I hope. Additionally, his subtle, indirect, and possibly subconscious attack against King James onlyism was beautiful. Mark Ward would be proud. Trent's argument against recitation as evidence for inspiration likely made some Quran reciters feel uncomfortable, if not in their souls, then at least in their guts. And Trent's discounting the measuring truth claims based on the results of one's following of the faith weakens the credibility of all sacred texts, not just those in the Abrahamic tradition. It also goes against an argument I often use in defense of the Bible and Christianity. But when Trent begins attacking the credibility of LDS witnesses, I felt this also damaged the New Testament and Old Testament witness credibility as well. It is unfortunate that Trent went there, and while he did not give Jacob the answers Jacob was hoping for, Trent did expose a well-known open secret about the reliability of Christian sources, that we rely on witnesses who, in our modern world, would be deemed, if not unreliable, at least questionable. His most stinging blow came in his second rebuttal, where he indicated that martyrdom, sincerity, and honesty do not indicate accuracy or correctness, as one can be sincerely mistaken or simply delusional. His attack on the immorality of Joseph Smith is an indictment against all religious leaders who have ever existed except Jesus Christ. Although heretics, blasphemers, false Christians, atheists, and anti-theists would even question the Christian claims of Jesus' perfect morality. This gets us to the cross-examination, which was intense and engaging. Too much so to cover in full detail here, given this already lengthy review. Jacob consistently undermined the Bible, particularly the Old Testament Pentateuch, the Jewish Torah, with almost every question. However, he did manage to expose Trent's biases, highlighting Trent's reluctance to admit them, a personal flaw unrelated to the debate's topic. Despite their friendly demeanor, they were not just playful. They threw hard rhetorical and verbal punches at each other, which landed on both sides. The cross-examination is worth watching for its entertainment value alone, and as a demonstration of how to maintain composure while staying feisty and active in a debate. Both men were on their toes and constantly moving. Jacob tried to get Trent to admit that the Book of Mormon wasn't evil, an odd goal, as Jacob never laid the groundwork for it, nor did Trent make such a claim during the debate. However, in a twist, Trent hit his response to this question out of the park, though Jacob took it in stride. Jacob's attacks were sustained throughout the cross-examination during his question time, but it was not always clear what his objective was or how it was relevant to the debate based on what had been discussed up to that point. Jacob's criticism of eyewitness accounts was a mistake. It did not bolster the credibility of the Book of Mormon, but it could undermine the credibility of the Bible in the minds of the debate's audience. Trent seemed aware of this risk and did his best to mitigate the collateral damage Jacob was causing to the credibility of both religions, and possibly all Abrahamic faiths. Jacob's weakest moment came at about 1 hour and 11 minutes into the debate, closer to the 1 hour, 12-minute mark, when he claimed that Trent's sources came from the enemies of the Church of Latter-day Saints. In reality, Trent's sources included the Church of Latter-day Saints' own website and the Book of Mormon. So this was a low point for Jacob. However, this moment was followed by the actual heart of the argument, when Trent finally addressed the credibility, authenticity, and inspiration of the Book of Mormon, as Jacob pushed him to admit that there were golden plates. Trent also appears to have developed a tell. Every time he gets caught, he seems to swallow hard and display a small tick under his chin, just above his throat. While he seems to be working on controlling his facial expressions and the amount of internal emotion he allows to be seen externally, his tells are still quite apparent. I think this remains a problem, as I have mentioned in previous reviews of other debates involving Trent. During his answers in the cross-examination, Jacob showed himself unwilling to respond directly to questions, that could hurt his argument. This wasn't slimy or weaselly like how some apologists come off in these debates, but it still demonstrated a lack of willingness to answer bluntly. Trent, on the other hand, did an excellent job of destroying any semblance of credibility regarding the historical accuracy of the Book of Mormon. He didn't spend much time dismantling the theological, ethical, or moral value of the Book of Mormon. Instead, he focused on eradicating any claim to historical truth within the book. The Book of Mormon's value as a piece of historical record relevant to Native American or indigenous Mesoamerican history was completely undermined by Trent's questions and Jacob's inadequate answers. As for the literary value of the Book of Mormon, Trent seems to suggest that it had none, though he didn't dive deeply into his reasonings for this. Jacob appeared to have miscategorized the Book of Mormon in his mind, viewing it as an ethnocentric ancient history of the Americas written in Reformed Egyptian, a language that Trent easily dismissed as non-existent, from a culture that never existed, in a land we cannot identify, and at a time we cannot pinpoint. The audience question portion of the debate was largely irrelevant. It had little to do with the topic at hand, and mostly served as an opportunity for Catholics and Christians to poke holes in Mormonism and the LDS Church, rather than addressing the credibility of the Book of Mormon itself or its status as inspired. At one point, Matt Fradd, the moderator, rightfully excused Jacob from answering certain questions, as even Fradd could tell they were becoming offensive. To Jacob's credit, he continued to answer, as a few low blows were thrown at Catholicism and Trent as well. But as an experienced on-air apologist for Catholic answers, Trent easily brushed these away. There was an interesting moment around the 1 hour 54-minute mark when discussing the Church of the Lamb and the Church of the Devil, highlighting the contrast between Catholicism and Mormonism. But again, this wasn't the topic of the debate. Then came the closing statements. Jacob's closing statement began with an appeal to Mormonism as a Christian faith and emphasized that trust in the Book of Mormon is based on witness testimony of its existence and composition. However, this does not address the question of whether the facts contained within the book are true or false, thus undermining its credibility by answering the wrong question. The witnesses to the Bible don't have to be the writers of the Gospels if Jesus truly rose from the dead. But if the resurrection never happened, then even if all the other claims in the Bible are true, Christianity is false. By arguing that the Bible is just as flawed as the Book of Mormon, and that the creation or reception of the Book of Mormon has more witnesses than the events described in the Gospels or the Book of Exodus, Jacob fails to prove the Book of Mormon true. While Jacob may have been arguing against claims Trent made elsewhere, these were not claims Trent brought to this debate. Jacob was too concerned with defending his book from embarrassment to realize that he was degrading the esteem of the Bible to defend the Book of Mormon. In Trent's closing statement, Trent calmly and directly addressed that Jacob failed to meet the burden of proof for the claim that the Book of Mormon is divinely inspired. Trent effectively tied together the threads of the entire debate, stating that while Jacob was trying to show that God is the author of the Book of Mormon, all he demonstrated was that human writing is fallible. Trent concluded by dismantling any comparisons between Mormonism and Christianity, a proper closing based on how the debate unfolded. However, I don't think this was the best approach because it left much unsaid. An atheist, anti-theist, and other YouTube skeptics might exploit these gaps, particularly regarding how the apostles and their successors may or may not have failed in the early church. Trent also relied on evidence from the Bible in his closing statement. Evidence disputed by scholars, cynics, and skeptics of biblical claims. For instance, his remarks about the golden plates returning to heaven could be turned against the resurrected Jesus and his ascension. In the end, this was a good and entertaining debate, but one I feel did more damage than good. 4 out of 5, but Jimmy Akin said,